Well, we are officially recording. So, James Martin, welcome to Brolosophy.
Thanks, Doc.
Cool. So, you are an associate professor. We just... Oh, damn it. I stuffed it up right away. Associate professor of criminology.
Yeah, that's
right. Cool. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, James. Tell us about, who is James Martin?
So I work in criminology. That's my main sort of gig at Swinburne University these days. I've been doing crim for, I guess, over 10 years or so now. My main sort of area of focus or speciality is the Darknet drugs trade. But that's not where I started. I was doing my PhD... Wow, yeah, it was nearly 10 years ago now, studying vigilante gangs in a shantytown in Johannesburg.
Wow.
Yeah, which was it was interesting. It was pretty hectic, as you can imagine.
It would have been.
Well, yeah, it was really interesting talking to people there. Basically, very high crime sort of neighbourhood. About 80,000 people there. Very high rates of unemployment. But police do not go into these settlements. They're persona non grata. So, basically in an environment like that, people want to do something about crime, but the government's not there to help, so they improvise. And that improvisation can get pretty scary at times.
Wow, really? Johannesburg's one of the most dangerous cities on the planet, right? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think outside of any sort of active war zones, it'd be up there somewhere.
Yeah. I actually thought I was going to die in Johannesburg once. I've only thought twice that I was... in my life, I've thought twice. I thought, oh, shit, I'm in really trouble. I'm in some serious trouble here.
Yeah.
And one of them was in Joburg after not one of the smartest decisions I've made, but after it was only the smallest disagreement with the taxi driver who was trying to rip me off. Like, he was legit trying to rip me off. I got lots of Josie mates and I was visiting.
Yeah.
I was only there for a day on the way to Cape Town on a holiday. And it was the equivalent of like a $10 in Rand taxi ride from my mate's place to the Baron in the CBD, this bar. And then on the way out, the guy tried to charge me like 100. He knew I was foreigner and tried to charge me like $150 or whatever, equivalent in Rand. And I'm not an argumentative guy and I'm not aggressive and I'm very non-confrontational. But I was like, nah, mate. Like, I'm not doing that. Wasn't born yesterday. Like, I've been here heaps of times. Just kind of bullshit, made that. Like, I knew exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And then he started yelling at me, and I was like, oh, and then a number of, probably like 10 guys circled around the car and started yelling in the window, "You're dead, motherfucker. We're going to kill you. You don't know where you are, you motherfucker." Like, just started. And I thought, oh, fuck, I'm dead. For sure. I know Johannesburg,
Yeah.
My mates, I got to Johannesburg and MJ let me in and he opened the gates and they have like probably same size ceiling, 15-foot high walls with barbed wire and broken glass. It's a penitentiary, their house, you know?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Wild part of the world. So, that was a fuck up on my behalf. But I imagine, so how long did you spend over there when you're doing your thesis or PhD, did you say?
Yeah. So I was doing my field work there, so gathering, interviewing local people, finding out what they thought about the vigilantism that was going on around them and that I was sometimes participating in. Because, that's the thing, people hear, like scream in the night or something. Here, typically what people do, first thing, you get on the phone to the cops and then maybe you peek your head out the window and see if you can, do something. Whereas, if you know the cops are never going to come, people start banding together. And it's a really dangerous situation because you don't know what's happening. And very quickly a crowd arrives and the crowd makes a decision. You've got about 10 seconds to convince, the first few people that come into the room actually, no, this isn't what it looks like. Because once they make up their mind, nobody's getting in between you and the crowd. It's too dangerous. So, the interviewing people they were like, look, I knew in that situation that it wasn't what it looked like. I knew, my friend was innocent or, whatever. But once you step between, the crowd and who they've decided in that moment is, responsible or the criminal, the baddie, then you become part of the baddies as well. If 100 people, 200 people all want to get a kick in, there's not much left of the person usually by the time they're done.
Man, that's horrific. What's it called what's it called, the tipping point when a mob becomes like uncontrolled, like, what's it called? Oh, there's a tipping point somewhere, isn't there, where obviously if so many people become, up in arms and aggressive and so forth, that it becomes it goes too far and it becomes one in, all in.
Yeah.
There's a term for it, I think.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at.
Yeah,
I don't know what the term would be either. But that's basically what we're studying. It's like when, like crickets and locusts are the same thing.
Yeah.
But, once you get a certain amount, they start swarming and behaving in a different way.
Right.
And humans do the same thing.
Have you read Civilized to Death?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I just finished Civilized to Death.
That's the Chris
Ryan.
Yeah, I read Sex at Dawn.
So you would know Chris Ryan.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously that's one of the that's where I heard that analogy first. Civilized to Death just came out. Probably 2 months ago, and I just finished it on Audible about a week ago.
Yeah.
I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's a scary, sad, but great analogy.
Yeah,
for the human being.
Yeah, or kind of like a stampede, as well. Crowd dynamics are really scary because most people there, the people I was interviewing, said that they didn't actually believe in capital punishment. They believed in corporal punishment, and then when they caught someone who was, hurting someone or stealing something, they'd want to give them a good kicking. But they didn't want the person, they wanted to stop at the point where, before someone gets permanently injured or killed. But the crowd doesn't do that. Most vigilante attacks end in death.
Really?
Yeah, so there's this real, and then people feel guilty because, particularly if the person was found to be innocent afterwards. So there's a lot of...
Who finds them to be innocent? Just the crowd, just the locals, they find out.
Yeah.
Just by anecdotal evidence that the person was innocent,
It was a misunderstanding. It was it doesn't what it looked like. Or the person was actually, it was the other person who was responsible,
So none of this stuff goes reported. So the only people reporting this is like journalists and so forth, people that are in there studying or like film crews. Because it seems like when you're in places like I've seen Louis Theroux documentaries in Joburg and stuff. It seems like who else? Ross Kemp and gangs and all these documentaries that have been out. It always feels like those people are welcomed in to tell the story, and it's like they're out of bounds. For is that kind of what it's like?
Yeah,
but cops can't go in there.
Yeah, that was right. So the vigilantes. So originally, when I wanted to do my PhD on organised crime, but of course, organised crime groups in Australia or anywhere around the world typically don't want a PhD student hanging around with a notepad saying.
So you said I'll do disorganised crime.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I was kind of in a bit of a funk because I was like, I don't want to do a media analysis. I wanted to go out and get my hands dirty somewhere. And then I read about these gangs essentially that go around. They kill people. They they use a lot of extreme violence. Some of them are very organised, like the ones Louis Theroux was interviewing. They've got 100,000 members. Some of those organisations, chapters across the country. So and they're very happy to talk about what they do. A, because they're not scared of the police. The police often turn a blind eye or are sometimes complicit in whatever they do. But B, they don't think they're doing the wrong thing. They see what they're doing as a community service. They're taking out the trash when no one else is doing it. So they're very happy to talk.
Wow, I actually I've been to the favelas in Rio and done the regular favela tour, and I actually went to a couple of favela parties, one with a tour and one on my not on my own, but one we just rolled in. And I learned a little bit about how they kind of do things over there in Rio, and it's very much the drug dealers. And correct me if I'm wrong. You probably know more of it than I do because maybe it's just through your research, or I'm not sure. But the drug dealers and gang members basically were like the community servants. Yeah, like they paid for the schools, paid for the roads, paid for the but everyone that was in the favela had to be on their side when it came to police involvement and like drugs and basically in drugs. Yeah. So like if the police were ever coming in, which it's very rare that they would have like all the locals would be on lookout and they would let they would go up the hill, They would signal to this person, to that person, to that person. Everyone would know, and there's walkie-talkies and people with guns in every corner. But it seemed like a well-oiled machine. Yeah. Like these favelas in Rio, I don't know about obviously Joburg and other places, but these favelas in Rio, they had schools and art galleries and soccer stadiums, and it was crazy. Yeah. Like it was pretty it was shantytowns, slums, but it was surprisingly well organised. Yeah. Is it like that in Joburg?
It's a little bit different. I think the main difference would be the money, because there isn't a drug trade that's being for export that's bringing back money into the place. But at the same time, I mean, the first time I went to Zandspreek, which is the settlement where I did my research, it's a slum, but it was weird. I was sort of expecting rubbish on the ground and a dilapidated kind of place. But people would be living, in houses that are made out of refuse, but they'd paint them and there'd be a little garden out the front. And there would be raw sewage, down the main sort of, dirt track. But the local people took a lot of pride in where they lived. Whereas, sort of slum in the West, it is, people just don't seem to give a shit.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
It's all relative, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like some people, some of the richest people in the world would look at the way that we, like my brother and his partner, she's like my sister pretty much. They just moved into a new apartment in Elwood, and it's really like, it's kind of a funny colour on the walls, and it's like, it's not the greatest apartment of all time, but you walk in there and it's beautiful because they've got indoor plants all around the place, and like the decor looks cool, and it's just, you can tell that it's a home and they've taken care. Like someone that's probably, worth $100 million would probably go, oh, what are you tarting up a shit heap like that for?
Yeah.
But it's all relative. It's your home and your space, and you want it to be as nice as possible. So that just shows good. That's just nice to hear. It's good.
Yeah, so anyway, I did that, and then I didn't actually realize it at the time, but I was getting increasingly stressed out just working in an environment like that because, while I felt no fear or anything from the vigilantes, but getting in and out of the settlement, and just being in Joburg in general. Yeah. I mean, people live there, but people leave there as well. And even though I'd been in a lot of dodgy places, and I'd spent some time in the army, and, I'd been used to being in environments where I was under a fair bit of pressure there over the course of months. By the end of it, I was just getting more and more. I don't know. It sort of felt like a bit of the Wild West. Sort of people were hard drinking, hard partying. I'm a bit of a hedonist anyway at times like that. Anyway, so I sort of got used to living on the edge and taking more and more risks. Yeah. Which started to freak me out. And anyway, by the time I left, I remember it wasn't until I walked through the security and was waiting at the gate to get the flight back home to Australia that I was like, shit, I think I've actually made it. I think I'm okay, and sort of breathed out for the first time in a long time. So I got back to Melbourne, and it was funny, actually. My mate was picking me up, and he had a copy of the Herald Sun in the car, and I remember the headline that was sitting on the passenger seat, and it said, "Crime Wave Hits Melbourne." And I'm looking around, people are driving with their windows down, and it's this beautiful sunny day, and I'm like, fuck off, what are you talking about,
Yeah, that's right.
I decided after that I needed to move into a different area of research. I didn't want to go into any favelas or shantytowns anymore, and luckily for me, people who mates of mine had started buying drugs off this thing called Silk Road, which I'd never heard of before.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Before we move on to the dark web, the dark web drug dealing stuff, which I'm definitely keen to talk about. One question, just wrapping up that stuff of talking about the favelas and living on the edge and so forth. When you came back, was it a bit of a adrenaline dump? Did you feel like coming back? Because people talk about coming back from war zones. Are you familiar? If you're familiar with Chris Ryan, if you're familiar with Sebastian Younger.
Oh yeah. I've heard him interviewed on various podcasts as well.
Yeah, and he talks about in this book here, Tribe, this is one of my favourite books. We give it to all of our clients with my business. But he talks about people coming back from war zones and talking about, it was the happiest time of their life, and they felt alive and they felt in the moment. Is that was it a bit of a transition when you did come back, or?
Yeah, yes and no. I think one of the differences with Tribe is that I was doing a lot of this research by myself. Yeah. I had some local research assistants, but it wasn't this kind of us all in
communal,
it together kind of vibe. So I think it was a little bit different from that. But I definitely felt an adrenaline dump when I got back. And it took a little bit of time to integrate what had happened over there. And I don't want to overplay it. Like, as I said, people live there their whole lives,
Yeah, for sure.
But it's definitely, a big contrast to a very safe place like Australia.
Interesting, man. I couldn't imagine the stuff you were saying. That's fascinating. In the lead up to this show, it's funny because what happens is either myself or one of our producers does talent scouting, and they put profiles across to me, and they're like, "Oh, do you think this?" I'll say this person would be good for the show, or Matthias will say, "Oh, this person might be good. What do you think?" And I saw your profile, and I clicked through and had a quick look at your TED Talk and read a bit about your bio, and I was like, "Yes, I would love to have that conversation. It's fascinating." And it was really funny because I did all the prep in the last couple of days, just like watching a couple of the videos and getting my head around what I wanted to talk about. But it was really interesting because 2 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago, my best mate and I caught up at my other mate's kid's birthday party, and my mate's on steroids for the first time. He's like 34, 35, and he's like, looks like a fucking juice head. And anyway, and I don't know how we got onto it, but he's like, "Mate, do you know how much the whole world has changed?" He goes, I buy my steroids off the dark web. And I was like, dead set. And he goes, yeah, and he doesn't really, take party drugs much anymore, but we did when we were growing up together. But he still does sometimes. So if he's got like a wedding or whatever, he'll like buy a bag of Coke or whatever. And he goes, bro, I buy my fucking bags of Coke off the dark web. He goes, the mailman delivers it. And this is the first I'd heard of it.
Yeah.
And then only a couple of days later, I'm talking to you and actually going deep into it. But it's so fascinating. So talk to us about. I've never even been on the dark web. I don't know how to do it. My mate from the conversation a few days ago was kind of, breaking it down for me. But it's always been so, foreign to me. So how do you actually get on the dark web?
It's easy, and it's not illegal to get on the dark web. All you need to do is you download this thing called a Tor Browser, which is I'm not a computer scientist, by the way. I'll just put that out there, but know the basics of how the technology works, what it can do. And it's basically it's like a different internet browser, like a Chrome or a Safari or something. Yeah. But it uses this special network which is the Tor network, the dark web. And basically, what it does is it scrambles your IP address. So instead, usually when you log on to the internet, unless you're using a VPN or something, who you are, where you're located, it all comes down to this unique identifying number that's attached to your computer. So, if you send a death threat or, do something else illegal online, the cops will be able to trace it back to that number. Yeah. But once you're on the dark web, that number is effectively, scrambled. And the encryption that they use is incredibly simple. It's free. But it's also very powerful. To do like a blunt force attack on it, you need like a supercomputer in 10,000 years to crack this code. If you're using it correctly, there are vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the system, but they're very difficult to exploit.
Really, that's fascinating. Because always, I've used VPNs for different bits and pieces in the past, like downloading stuff or like some other, whatever it is, trying to get on like Netflix of Europe because it's better than Australia, And they seem to break every now and again, but the dark web, not always, they're pretty good. But the dark web is basically impenetrable IP-wise. You won't be found.
If you're using it right, yep.
Cool. Full on. So where did I think probably 10 years ago I started hearing about the dark web and people buying drugs, and it was through the Silk Road or whatever it was called. And I never went on there, and I kind of thought that it must have just fizzled out. It must have been kind of like the Pirate Bay, even though you can still download stuff off the Pirate Bay, but that was a pirate side, and then it got harder and harder and cracked down, and then now, I don't know, you can kind of probably still download stuff from it, but I thought that happened with the dark web and buying drugs, but it's the opposite. Is that right?
It is the opposite. Yeah, it's bigger now than it's ever been.
Really?
And it's that's kind of the narrative, I guess, that law enforcement wants to put out there. And when they cracked down on Silk Road, they were like, right, this is proved that the dark web drug trade is over. No one's beyond the long arm of the law. Yeah. And instead, it was the opposite. What Ross Ulbricht, the guy who got busted for being Dread Pirate Roberts, the guy who started the site.
Okay.
What he did essentially was just prove actually that this is a viable business model. He made $80 million in Bitcoin in about 2 years. And oh God, if he had those Bitcoins, that was Bitcoin value back then, it would be worth God knows.
That's $1 trillion.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it would be in the billions.
It actually probably would be something like that.
It'd probably be in the billions.
In the billions, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, where did you come into it? Yeah. So, how come you ended up looking at dark web?
Yeah, so when I got back from Africa and I was like, all right, I need a different area of research. And it's funny because academics, usually you get siloed pretty quickly. You figure out a specialty and a niche and you sort of sit there. And it's an unusual situation where you're sort of like, okay, I know I don't want to do this. I'm looking for something else. And even more unusual, there's something new comes on the scene. And I remember reading about it. There was there's a famous piece in Gawker that sort of unveiled it and, to the rest of the wider world. And I remember going on Google Scholar, which is, the academics sort of sites about what peer-reviewed papers out there. And there was basically nothing there. There was one letter to the editor of a magazine written by someone who I work with quite a lot now. Actually, both the papers that were there, were people who I've done research with now. But there was basically no criminological work done on it. There was no real conceptualization of it. There was no, all right, what does this mean for drug trafficking? What does this mean if it keeps growing? So it was like, kind of age of discovery, finding new land with no flags on it yet. Like, wow, okay, great. So I got to work and, I managed to write the first book, in the world, about it and a bunch of other papers since then. And it's been sort of the golden goose ever since. So for people that don't know, so what does the actual, like if say on the weekend, I want to go and
buy drugs, who am I buying them from? What's the process like? Talk to us about what it actually looks like.
Yeah, sure.
In the thick of it.
So the sort of common way that it's described in the media is like an eBay of illicit drugs, and it's actually a really good analogy because the Darknet marketplaces or crypto markets, they don't sell anything themselves. They just host this secure infrastructure the same way that eBay does.
Yep.
And unlike eBay, the only sort of significant difference, I guess, eBay's got the bidding system, whereas on these sites, people just, you create a seller page. So if you've got some crack you want to sell or some, whatever, you go onto the site, you create a seller page, you sometimes pay like a registration fee, might be $100, something like that.
Yeah. And
then you create your page. You take some photos of, of what you want to sell. You write your little spiel. Here's our, guarantee to customers, blah, blah, blah. And then if you want to buy something, you create a buyer account, which are free. And then you go, all right, I want to buy some crack for this weekend or, some pot. Most of it's actually pot. That's the biggest product category.
Yeah.
And then you go, right, I want to buy it from, you can search by location. So, quite often, particularly in Australia, people won't want to buy from dealers who are located overseas because they either don't want to wait, 3 weeks or something to arrive from Europe, or they don't want to take the risk of it coming through customs, which are lower typically than people think. But still, you don't want to spend 3 weeks necessarily wondering the whole time whether it's been intercepted or not. Right. So you might just limit your search to local dealers. But the sort of genius of the way the sites work is just the same as eBay or Uber. It's all about customer feedback and ratings. So the dealers will say, hey, look, whatever happens, the top dealers will be like, please don't give us a bad rating. If you're not happy with the product or the service somehow, get in touch with us. We'll sort you out, because their rating is basically how they attract customers. Yeah. So that system incentivizes behavior in a really different kind of way. It's a bit like I don't know if you remember in Melbourne before we had Uber.
I know the analogy you're about to make 100%.
Yeah, I mean, taxis were just a nightmare, right?
And the way people would treat taxi drivers also.
Vice versa, customers would treat taxi drivers like shit, and taxi drivers wouldn't pick customers up.
Yeah, you weren't on the hook.
If you're in the city at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get home,
I remember it.
It was nearly impossible.
People would laugh at you. Where are you going? And I'd say, I'm going in the morning to Peninsula. Yeah. And I'd get in and go, oh, actually, you know what? Scrap that. Just take me down the road.
Yeah. And
Because you couldn't get them otherwise.
Yeah, I'm not an altercation person. I had altercations in that situation because the system was bad.
Yep.
And then Uber comes along, and often, it's exact same customers, often the same drivers. People who used to drive for taxis, driving for Ubers. You're getting from A to B in a car, but suddenly it all works.
Yeah.
And similarly, do we see something on the Darknet? There was the first sort of big quantitative study. So, they're actually sucking up because we can see all this data. And so some of the people I work with, they're pretty savvy quantitative researchers, programmers and whatnot. They create these programs that basically hoover up all of the data, and then we can analyze it. We can analyze, a particular drug dealer's career, or the whole drug trade going through a particular site, or all the sites. And the first study that was done on this, they found that on Silk Road, I think it was over the course of like 30,000 transactions over the course of a year, something like that. It was 97.8% of the transactions had either a 4 or a 5-star rating in terms of customer satisfaction.
That's doing great business.
Yeah, I mean, that's a low customer satisfaction. I think any enterprise.
NPS, great NPS scores.
Yeah.
Man, that's so funny. So, just to get my head around it a little bit, just on the logistics of it, kind of. So, are they all? So, is the Silk Road shut down?
Yeah.
Okay, so are there a number of eBay-like sites, or are they like sites where it's like Joe's Weed, come to Joe's Weed, and they sell all their own?
Yeah, there's a little bit of both. Are
people building standalone companies on the dark web? I mean, I guess.
Yeah. So you're right. So there's sort of main sort of crypto markets, the eBay-style ones like Silk Road, and when Silk Road was in operation, it pretty much had a monopoly on the trade. There were other little ones out there. People were trying to copy it, but why would you go anywhere else when that was
most reputable?
Most reputable, and
the Amazon of the dark web.
Exactly. Right? So that was the sort of the one-stop shop, and it worked really well for its intended purpose. But once that shut down, the market decentralized and fragmented. So people realized that, all right, actually cops can bust us. But here's the weird thing, though. Most of the sites that have been taken offline have not been taken offline because of police. They do these things called an exit scam. So the way these sites work, it's all about how to generate trust in an anonymous online environment. So the way these sites work is they'll go, all right, Doc wants to sell some crack. I want to buy some crack. So, I order it off you. It's untraceable, unrefundable Bitcoins. So I don't actually send it straight to you. It goes to the administrator of the site, and he holds it until my crack arrives. And then I go, right.
It's like an escrow account.
It is an escrow account. Yes. Exactly. So what happens over a period of time, the bigger and bigger the site gets, the more and more money is being held in these escrow accounts. And at some point, the administrator of the site goes, look, I've been doing this for 6 months. We haven't got busted. There's 60 million in, this escrow account now. I can just walk away, go to the Bahamas or whatever. So at some point, this is the most common way these sites go offline. Someone just shuts their laptop and nicks off.
What? Oh my God, that's so ridiculous. So, that's fascinating. So with these sites, one of the things I was going to ask is, are the sites illegal?
Would
they go to jail for being at the middle? Yeah. Well, because they are selling drugs, aren't they?
Well, yeah.
They're just the middleman, but the bigger middleman.
Yeah, so they're facilitating, the trade.
Yeah.
And it's weird because we see really disparate sentencing with this. So Ross Ulbricht, the guy who was convicted of running Silk Road, he ended up getting a double life sentence plus 30 years. So he will be in prison, barring a miracle for the rest of his days.
Oh, far out. Where was that guy from?
He's American. He actually lived in Melbourne for a while.
Oh, really?
He was running the whole thing, from his laptop using public Wi-Fi at a public library in San Francisco.
Far out. That's kind of a bit sad because that's such a funny story. He would have been like, I'm taking the piss here. This is great. And it cost him his whole entire life.
Oh, yeah. And he did this. And he was actually really politically motivated. Like, he was staunch libertarian, vociferous, anti-war on drugs kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he created, he created the Uber. There was actually it's a better way of getting drugs from A to B. If people are going to buy illicit drugs. Safer, you're eliminating the street trade.
And he went to jail forever for it.
Yeah, and he... and the weird thing is that's more time than we give to pedophiles or to terrorists or whatever. So
wild.
But the reason was, in the end, he was overtly political about it. He was like, nope, this is about screwing the FBI, screwing the DEA. They're the real criminals here. And he did this 10-page interview with Forbes magazine. About 3 months before he was captured. And he was like, look, the war on drugs is over. We've won it. The guys with the bongs won.
Yeah.
It seems a bit like hubris now because he was busted shortly after. But he really pissed off these...
Oh, man. The worst people in the world you want to piss off.
Yeah, they don't take the joke. And he made them look like fools. Yeah. And so, when it came time to throw the book, they threw everything that they could.
That's a really sad story, actually,
to
be honest. It depends where you sit on the war on drugs and the... War on consciousness, to borrow another term from another bloke who I read his books. But I think it's just that's quite sad in a way. I don't know him. He might have been a terrible guy. I don't know. He might have been at it for terrible reasons. But it's also, drugs kill people, but far out. I think drugs should be legal, to be honest. I think that people should be able to make their own decision on what they do with their life and their consciousness and so forth. And we have laws for a reason, I think. And, you can get drunk. As long as you can get drunk, drugs should be legal. Yeah. Because drinking's a drug, and it's a fucking bad one.
Oh, it's the worst. It's the worst per capita, even.
Yeah.
So even if you control for the number of users, it still does way more harm than pot or than MDMA or psychedelics. Oh, yeah.
Full on.
Yeah, this is... I agree with you, broadly about sort of legalization. These... And it's not to say, look, if someone gets high and then, goes out and commits a crime, well, charge them, for committing whatever crime they did.
That's right.
But most illicit drug users, 90% plus, are non-problematic. It's the same proportion roughly for problematic drinkers. It's 1 in every 10 will have a problem.
Yep.
But we don't ban drinking because they're 1 in 10. We have restrictions around who can buy it, when you can buy it, and et cetera, et cetera. But, but in a lot of countries, you go to Italy or, France or whatever, you can get booze any time of day, anywhere. And they have fewer drinking problems than we do. They do less binge drinking.
Yeah, so a weird culture like that.
The restrictions in a lot of ways. The analogy I kind of like is, if you put up an idiot-proof fence absolutely everywhere, well, eventually people just think, oh, okay, I'll just act like an idiot because that's how society's conditioning me to behave.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go to, I remember the first time I went out in Berlin. I was amazed at how little security there was around. There's someone on the door and, maybe very discreet security in the back. But most people, even if they were absolutely shit-faced or really high or whatever, were just keeping it together. They've just got a different culture about getting, about partying like that. Whereas here, people tend to lose their minds. And it's not actually the drugs doing that, I don't think, in most cases.
That's really interesting psychological... Yeah, that's... I wonder why that would be.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to just social norms. So people, and they've done studies with this around, placebo effect of being drunk. People act drunk, and people act. You actually act drunk.
We gave a cigarette with a twirled end when we were 15 to our girlfriends, and we told them it was a joint because we used to get our joints and we'd put them in actually cigarettes with butts. All we do is we'd push them in and we'd twirl the end. We know it was a joint in our cigarette packet.
Yeah.
We gave it to the girls, and they were talking about fucking seeing dragons and everyone was green and we were like, oh fuck. Girls, we gave you a cigarette. But yeah, so I don't know what was going on there, but
yeah, it's the same with booze. Like I was in Italy, I was in Rome. I couldn't believe it. We were sitting at the top where the Garibaldi Monument is, one of the big hills there, and I was there with an Italian bloke who was showing me around the place, and we were looking around, and there's maybe, I don't know, it was between maybe 10 and 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday or Saturday night, can't remember which one. And there would have been about 400 teenagers sitting around, all drinking. There were 2 little kiosks selling booze. Didn't see one fight, didn't see one person throwing up, not one broken glass. Because in Italian culture, it's just not cool to sit around and smash drinks. It would be like going, hey, let's go smash some espressos. Let's line up 10 espressos and shoot. Like people would just go like, what are you? You're an idiot. Like, what are you talking about? Why would you do that? So the culture just has different, attitudes to, they'll drink. They drink a lot, over the course of a week or whatever. But they don't get out of control.
Yeah, Australia are bad like that, aren't we? I went to where was it? Brisbane. It's the main street in Brisbane. I forget what it's called. I was just there for a sporting event 3 years ago, and we went out. My mates won the national championships at weightlifting, and we went out and had beers or whatever. And walking the street, I forget what it's called, but it's like the main drag in Brisbane City, and it's like 500 meters, and there's like bars, or it's maybe like a kilometre, I don't even know, but it's like bars on each side, and all on the street there's stuff going on. But I walked through there, and I was like, where am I? What is going on? It's like a regular Saturday in like the middle of June, and there was people throwing up on the street, girls pulling their bras up and showing their tits, and like people punching on, and it was mayhem. I'm like, this is a normal Saturday in Australia. I mean, that was the wildest, just regular area I've been, like King's Cross, kind of like in Sydney, and I guess Melbourne gets loose as well, and so forth. But it was really quite embarrassing, I was like, wow. And you see that when you see Australians travelling, We're sure. I've travelled all over the world. I've travelled to 45 countries or whatever, spent a lot of time backpacking, and I'll happily make friends with any Australian, with anyone from anywhere, obviously. Yeah. But I also deliberately try and hang with other cultures I want to, hear different stories and so forth. But also because I know that the only people that will ever piss me off in the world is Australians when I'm travelling. I'm just like, fuck, you're doing us all in here. Yeah,
it's odd hearing an Aussie accent when you haven't heard one for a while. You're like, oh, no, what are we doing? What are we up to?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting. So getting back to Silk Road, so who are the drug dealers? Like, are we talking shaved head, tattoos, sitting at home, smoking bongs, getting pissed, like getting for whatever, all that, or are we talking about like young, tech savvy entrepreneurs, effectively?
Yeah.
Like, or is it somewhere in between, or a bit of both?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and
we don't really know, I guess, to a degree as well.
We don't know heaps because very few of them get caught. Because they're protected by encryption. You've got geographical separation between point of sale and the customer. So trying to police this stuff is extraordinarily difficult. But we actually, so one of the research teams that I run, we just wrapped up a series of interviews with active Darknet drug dealers. So we posted a series of ads. We were like, look, we're critical of the war on drugs. We think that there's maybe harm reduction potential in the dark web drugs trade, and we want to hear. We think there's a different story to the one that's kind of been put out in the tabloid press, particularly about predatory dealers who want to hook your kids and that sort of narrative.
Richard Nixon narrative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we were like, but we need people to talk to us. If that narrative is there, and you want to talk to us about your experience, please get in touch. And we ended up, we did 13 interviews with dark web drug dealers around the world about who they were, what they, nothing identifiable obviously, but what they sort of got involved in it for. And about half of them had sold drugs in some capacity, usually at pretty small levels offline.
Yep.
The other half were like, nope, no way was I ever going to sell drugs. I was scared about possibility for violence, any kind of confrontation, worried about risk of police or whatever. Most of the people we spoke to came across as quite well educated, had pretty minimal financial goals. Like these are not people who wanted to be Scarface. They're aware that the bigger that you become, the bigger target you are for law enforcement. They're like, look,
sort of side hustlers.
Yeah, people will be like, look, I started off, using Silk Road or something similar, to get drugs for me and my mates. Then we realized actually this is a pretty good way of doing it. And we had a little bit left over, so we'd sell that, and that would cover the weekend, partying. And then we realized, we can maybe make a little bit more money doing that.
Yep.
But yeah, usually people will be like, I just wanted to, get enough for a deposit on a house, or I wanted to pay off my student debt. We had a number of people talking about that. And we're like, right, okay, that's it's an interesting motivation. So it was pretty like mainstream sort of financial goals. It wasn't like driving Maseratis around. That sort of thing.
buying lines and putting them in your backyard and that kind of
stuff. I mean, I think that's there as well, but I don't think it's kind of representative of the mates of the people that get involved.
No, that's fair. So what about, when you talk about these, very forward-thinking business practices, the fact that you're taking the drugs out of the streets and into the home, through your postman and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I already feel like there's going to be a lot more pros than cons, but can you talk to us about, just what you think are the pros, and if there are any cons in comparison to the old way of doing things with the new drug trade on the online stuff?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, the pros, so one of the big pros is questions around violence. So illicit drug markets tend to have quite low levels of violence. Violence is usually a sign that something's gone wrong. Somebody's defaulted on a debt, or that's probably one of the biggest ones.
This is offline. Did you say, or online?
This is offline. Offline, but generally levels of violence, are pretty low. But there's always the threat of violence, right? The threat of violence, whether it's from the bikie gangs or whatever organised crime groups, because if somebody defaults on a deal, they got to know there's going to be some sort of payback, and it usually doesn't involve the police, because these people. They've got a code of not getting in touch with police usually. Yeah. So there's this threat of violence, and if you're a drug dealer, that most people think, they'll be worried about the cops. Well, they might be worried about the cops, but the real danger is, you Chopper Reed sort of type, who's a standover man who's going to, if they figure out that you've got a stash, they're going to come in and chop off your toes until you hand it over, and maybe you don't walk out of there alive. So there's dangers there, and then maybe you go, okay, well, if I'm up against that sort of threat, maybe I need to buy a gun, or maybe I need to affiliate with a bikie gang who can offer me protection, or whatever. So violence is a valuable commodity, in the illicit drugs trade, and it's about 3/4 of the organised crime in this country is funded by the illicit drugs trade.
Really?
It's huge.
Wow.
It's the lifeblood of organised crime in Australia, and it is across much of the world as well.
Far out.
And it's not because of what the drugs do, it's just how much they're worth. You've got demand, you've got supply, you've got around, $600 billion, global, drug trade, something thereabouts. People are going to supply that. And, so you've got a lot of risks, just in trying to get, a valuable product like that runs outside of state control and regulation. But you do it online, and then, you've got dealers who are like, all right, well, I'm not worried about Chopper Reed because no one knows who I am anymore. My supplier, knows who I am, but they want to keep supplying to me, presumably. Or a lot of these suppliers are actually buying drugs on the Darknet themselves and then selling them on the Darknet. So they're not connected to any, physical illicit drug market. So it's kind of better for the sellers in that sense, but it's also better for the consumers, because unless you know your drug dealer really well, having some sort of customer feedback that gives you at least a semi-independent indicator of quality or perceived quality of the drugs. And when you've got dealers 100%. Who they make their careers on having this reputation and this profile, you can go there and you can read 500 reviews and you go, all right, well, probably there's a good chance that this is actually MDMA, or this is the strain of weed that I'm trying to buy. You have a better idea about what's in the drug, what adulterants may or may not be in it, a better idea about dosage. So, that all can help control the harms that are associated with the illicit drug use. Because obviously if you know what you're taking, then you can decide, do I want to have half or do I want to have two, or, whatever it might be. So there's benefits there as well. The sort of cons that exist, there's pros and cons. Usually, there's some really interesting research done by a lady called Monica Barrett, who I work with, and some of her colleagues. And they did a bunch of interviews with drug users about what happened to their drug use when they first started accessing these sites. And the name of the paper is What If You Live on Top of a Bakery and You Like Cakes? And people would describe just going, wow, I just suddenly started buying all of this stuff, and their drug use would increase. But then pretty quickly, they'd be like, oh, no, I can get this anytime. This sort of famine mentality of like, oh, right. It's a bit like when they call last drinks at the bar. People are like, oh, shit, all right, we better all start drinking heaps. But if the bar doesn't shut, people go, okay, well, you just have what you want.
That's
so they found that there was sort of this initial spike, but then it would tail off pretty quickly, and people would just, revert back to whatever they were doing usually. Usually people, it's the funny thing about drug use as well. Like, people tend to think that a lot of the harm comes from just the availability of these drugs, and we need to restrict the availability. The fact is, we're doing a really shit job of restricting availability.
Oh, I've never in my life, I don't take drugs anymore, but I never went a night where I was like, oh, damn it, we couldn't get any drugs.
Yeah, if you
want maybe 1 in 50.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe you can't get exactly what you want, or you can't get the quality you want, or whatever, but the availability, it exists if you want it. So these drugs aren't making things more available than they would otherwise be. The exception being like really niche kind of drugs, so ayahuascas and your DMTs, but they're not drugs of addiction anyway.
I got some. Where's this bloody? What is it? I got some ibogaine over there.
Oh, really?
This is ibogaine here. This little vial.
Wow. Okay.
Is ibogaine. I got it. That May Love Be Your Truth. Adam Isaac Miller. He wrote that in this little thing. He's a dude that came on the show, and he's medicinal marijuana and advocate.
And that's an anti-addiction drug, right? And people
that's
use that to quit things.
That's right.
So people, it's people who have dysfunction in other parts of their life. A lot of it has to do with trauma as well. If you've suffered, series of traumas in your childhood, they're the ones who are most likely to not be able to have a healthy relationship with their drugs, whether it's booze or whether it's something illegal as well. Most people, they, maybe you go out and you start taking, pills for a while, and then you realize, hang on, this is impacting my work, or I'm coming down all the time, or I'm starting to fail at uni. And most people at that point go, all right, I'm gonna wind it in. So I think, and this sort of ties into what you were talking about before with legalization. These drug laws are not keeping us safe. They make the drug more dangerous. It's essentially what they're doing is they're saying, all right, we need to make this as dangerous as possible to convince people to stop taking it. So, that's why we kind of pill testing, for example, because they're like, oh, it would send the wrong message. It's a bit like saying, okay, well, we better take seatbelts out of cars because, if you've got seatbelts,
people think that cars are too dangerous to drive.
Yeah, you're going to encourage people to speed. There should be the threat of imminent injury. And we're like, well, no, we don't do that with any other sort of thing. But with drugs, there's this kind of still moralistic sort of attitude towards them that people deserve what they get, and if they die, well, sometimes you got to break some eggs to make an omelette, and it's a pretty shit omelette that we've made for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like just what you said here. So I'm certain. Well, I'm not certain. I would imagine that around the world, a lot of the organised crime is paid for by illicit drugs. You said 3/4 in Australia, is that right?
Yeah.
So surely all those studies have been done in other parts of the world. The United States, obviously, are the leader in the war on drugs. What are your thoughts on... Well, I wrote down here prior to the show, legitimisation/legalisation. And I think legitimisation as in, obviously in the States now, weed is obviously big business. Anyway, we'll leave that one. But basically legitimisation of, the commercial side of drugs. But legalisation really is what I was talking about. So What do you think is the future of, legalization with any sort of drugs? Because I feel like there's just a groundswell that's slowly building on the fact that everybody knows the war on drugs is not working. And surely, like, that figure is that 3/4 of crime is paid for by illicit drugs. You know, I've heard people say, like, the biggest rebuttal to legalizing drugs for that reason is, well, criminals are always criminals. They'll just go to other things. Like, because Colombia, for example, you know, became the kidnap capital of the world after after Pablo Escobar's day, and so on and so forth. And, you know, criminals, you know, people that want to, you know, go outside of the law and find loopholes into making money and whatever, you know, they're going to be around.
Yeah.
But, like, we're throwing fuel on the fire of that at the moment.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that argument that, if you legalize drugs, they'll just find something else to do. I think it's a really specious argument. I don't think it stacks up at all. Because in the end, you know, people who commit crime for profit, they're not so ideologically committed to the idea of crime that they're going to do a job that's harder for them than a legal job if there's one available that offers more money.
Yeah.
It's just a simple question of economics. You know, somebody is going to supply this, you know, this multi-billion-dollar drug market.
Yep.
If you legalize that, you take away opportunities for profit, and eventually it will come to a point where you're like, okay, well, hang on, I may as well just get a job or, you know, whatever, because it's you know, the opportunities are there. And also with the online drugs trade, I mean, it's getting bigger every year. We know that. You know, we actually know the scale of it way more than we actually do than the offline drugs trade, because we can see all, you know, a lot of the transactions that are taking place. And I've had people say to me, well, hang on, so you've just got, you know, bikie gangs who are moving into that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but now they're specializing in customer service and, you know, and product quality instead of going around kneecapping people. Yeah. So maybe, but is that such a bad thing anyway?
Yeah, that's right. Or the bikies go to business. They go to the Silk Road or whatever the equivalent is, and if they continue their ways or they don't give a fuck and the service is poor and whatever, then
they can't compete, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so, and that's kind of, I think it's in some ways what we're seeing now with the rise of the Darknet drugs trade. It is slowly transforming how drugs are retailed around the world. And it's a little bit like, I think we're kind of in a position like Myers and David Jones, you know, the big department stores were back in the 90s when legitimate online retailing started happening. People were like, nah, it's never going to take off. People are always going to want to come into a store to try, you know, no one's going to just buy this stuff online. But of course, the online retailers ended up taking over the market because they can sell directly to a customer. You got a simpler supply chain. You know, you can supply better quality products at a cheaper price, and that's exactly what these people are doing online. So why do you need, you know, these big sort of, you know, organized crime equivalents of Myers and David Jones anymore when, you know, there's a technological alternative available?
So if we're talking online and offline drug trade, so say 1990, just to use it, you would say 100% would have been offline, right?
Yeah.
And then what about, say, 2005, which would probably be where the Silk Road and so forth, maybe, I don't know, started?
2011 was
2011,
Silk Road.
okay.
So, yeah, Silk Road, it hasn't even been around 10 years.
Right, okay. Yeah. Well, let's just fast forward to now. So what percentage, I know you don't know the data on, or as much data on, the offline drug trade, but what percentage would you say, with what you know, would be sold offline and would be sold online these days? It's in Australia.
If we pick something like Australia, it would be a few percent probably. Yeah.
Online?
It would be online, yeah.
Gotcha.
So I think the latest data that we saw from the Global Drug Survey, so this is the world's biggest online drug survey, and I'd encourage any of your listeners to participate, because they use this data for really good purposes. Of course, it's all anonymous as well. I think they said in Australia now, in the last 12 months, it's about 17 or 18% of people who use illicit drugs have bought at least some of those drugs off the darknet. So, but that's not including, you know, it's not a representative sample, so you're already sampling online people. So it's not including your homeless drug user.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and it's they've bought online, not they buy all their drugs online.
Exactly. Yeah. So ballpark, kind of estimated, educated guess would be around, I'd say around 5%, something like that. But that number is getting bigger and bigger every year.
Yeah. And what do you think it will look like in 10 more years' time?
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, hopefully by then we've actually got a bit more movement in the legalization space. You know, we've had Canada go to full federal legalization for weed now. And as you said before, lots of parts of the states, I think roughly half the states either have medicinal or recreational cannabis. typically we follow whatever the US does, you know, in time. And if you do that, you know, even if you just legalized cannabis, you would actually, I mean, the biggest, most popularly traded category in the dark web drugs trade is cannabis. And actually, most drug arrests in this country are still for cannabis and still for possession, low-level drug possession. So most of the drug war is, and all of that
is so dumb.
All of it costs money.
Oh, man. What a waste. What a waste of time and energy.
And
money.
And money. You know, there's taxpayer dollars that could actually, And then you throw non-violent drug offenders in prison. It costs around 100 grand to keep one person in a medium security prison for a year. It's about triple what you could put, for a drug rehab facility. I mean, what else you could use that money for? You can use your imagination.
That's insane. So, cool. So, and what about you? So, what do you want to be doing in the next 5 or 10 years? Like, what's your future with all of this? Are you...
that's a good question. I'm, I love academia. It's really good fun. The research is good. The teaching's really, really good. But I do enjoy, getting, now that the data's so clear, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a criminologist, certainly in this country, that thinks the war on drugs is a success. Usually, I think we'll look back on it as one of the biggest, public policy failures of, the last 100 years. So, getting involved in advocacy around that, around harm minimization, decriminalization, legalization for at least some drugs as well. That's something I like going out and waving the flag for as well now.
And how much of the future of medicinal illicit substances? So obviously, like psilocybin is a Schedule 1 drug, and it's medicinally fast-tracked because of its efficiency in providing care to people for a number of different things.
Oh, absolutely.
And MDMA, how can you have a Schedule 1 drug? And then fast-tracked because of its medicinal use. It's so stupid. But that must be a big part in, legalization or at least decriminalization. Well, So how much do does it fire you up about that side of things? MDMA, psilocybin,
heaps,
so on and so forth.
It makes me really angry because these are things that MDMA very successful in the treatment of PTSD. Psilocybin for depression, near-death anxiety, which always trip me out. Some people take psilocybin and think they're going to die, but what happens when you give it to people who know they're going to die? They develop this sense of oneness, and they start not worrying so much about their own death, because they kind of had a look, around the curtain, and it's not so bad. All of these things have huge, legitimate medical application, and for treatment of pain or treatment of a whole bunch of things. I think we just have to unlearn a lot of the crap that has been associated with drug war propaganda. If you have a toke on a joint, before you know it, it's a gateway drug, and you'll be sitting in a gutter somewhere, shooting up. It's just not how it works.
I think the world is changing, and I think obviously technological advancements is probably the number one thing, but even just everything we've talked about today, I think it's going to be a totally different landscape, knowing absolutely bugger all about it. But I think I've followed closely the psilocybin trials and so forth, and seen a couple of speeches and read a lot of books and blah, 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 listened to a lot of podcasts. But it seems like the world is truly on its way to slowly changing. Which, I wonder what 2030 and 2040 will look like.
I think very different by then. And it's weird because it seems like there's often no change happening, but then change happens quick. The dominoes start falling pretty fast.
It's awesome.
So I don't know, keep fighting the good fight.
Bloody oath. All right, cool. So, James, before we wrap up today, you've given us so much to think about, and I'm sure people want to learn more. So where can people find you? Anything that you want to plug, your website, your talks, books, and whatever, anything you want to plug?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Jamo Martin at Twitter. You can look me up, James Martin, Dark Web, James Martin Crypto Market. You can see any of the, a lot of the articles.
That's your sellers profile?
It's the Google Scholars stuff. So you can click on that. A lot of the articles, aren't behind paywalls and stuff.
Cool.
And there's a couple of books out there as well. So, feel free to check them out.
Sweet. Unreal. What a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, cheers.
And that's a wrap.